episode today, we are going to show you the talent and mastery it takes to bring you a custom-made piece, whether it be a ring, pendant, no matter. If you have that beautiful gemstone, which I know you do, you can feel comfortable going to the right talented person to take that piece and turn it into the vision of your choice. In today's episode, we're going to show you exactly how that is done. So, what we have is the most important item of this project, the wax. The wax is everything. Little did you know that there are many different types of wax, different viscosities, different melting temperatures, different flow rates. You use it to build up, to take away. The wax is, I guess you could say, the end-all to be-all, because if you don't choose your wax properly to start with, you're going to have trouble down the road. Now, I have a few examples here just to give you an idea that by far 95% of all the jewelry you see starts with a wax. If you're looking at the one in the pink, look at the pink wax. Has a low melting temperature, so high viscosity. In other words, it flows really, pours like water. And it's great for doing little fine bead work. Those are holes for diamonds, ladies and gentlemen. Little did you know, yes, even those strips you see, they're done in a wax, especially when you see white on yellow gold. This next ring, the blue, well, I happen to know because I did it. This blue wax came out of a wax injector after a model had been made of the original gold ring. This color wax is best for doing injector work due to the temperature that it melts at. Look at this other darker pink. This particular wax is good for when you have a model that has thinner work needed, smaller prongs, so it's a kind of an in-between viscosity. And then you have the wax we're going to be working in today, the blue wax. The blue wax you can see here in this case I have used as a base wax. Then you see the other color wax on top. That's that light pink wax I used to build up because it's a lower flowing temperature than the wax below it, the blue wax. I have made the choice carefully and wisely with full consideration and have chosen to use a block of the blue wax. This is the form that the carvers and model makers can get it in. We can get it drilled out like that. We can get a solid block, but it helps if you start somewhat close to what you need. Okay, so the difference in today's show by way of tools, you're looking at it. We're going to be using burrs, but the burrs that you see, what's the difference? If you can imagine what the others look like, they have bigger, wider gaps between the cutting edges. And why and what for? That is to dispel the wax that gets cut. Wax, remember, is a low temperature medium, so it can heat up, and believe it or not, you're generating heat when that is spinning even in wax. So by being able to have that wider opening between the cutting edges, it allows the wax to flare and spin out of the burr and away from the burr, keeping the area you're working on clean. Believe me, it makes a big difference. You go to use one of those ones you normally use for a diamond, and it will clog up the whole burr. And then they actually make tools to clean that out as well, but that's for another show. All right, so just tools with wider openings, and pretty much those are the tools and only two styles that in today's episode we're going to be needing. Here's the project lined up in a row. The ring on the right is the ring that the client wants, my ring. But they have this most unusual stone to the far left. That is the one we're going to be doing this stunning custom piece for. And the first steps to get there are, the block of wax comes in a size 4.5. We're going to size out the wax to the proper size, and then we're going to create the center hole. And that is real important. So you have to create the center point that you work around, or else if that is even slightly off, it's kind of like the corner of a home. You get one corner wrong, the rest of it isn't going to line up, baby. So a lot of people measure this step, but for me, I just do it by eye. I'll do it from one side and judge the middle point and burr it just lightly. And then I spin it around, and without, of course, looking at the top, I'll pick the center point and burr it again. And depending on how close I get, and I'll actually show you. So you can see from left to right, I'm a little bit off. They didn't line up exactly perfect, but that's fine. What I will do from there is I take the midpoint. I will go in between the two. Now I'll judge the distance in this manner and put the hole through it with confidence, because remember, I made this 2 millimeters wider on each side. That gives me room to, quote, adjust center. All right, let's drill that hole out. Now, as you can see, the burr is clear of wax, but the heat, I can feel the heat was hot enough still to melt this wax onto the shaft of the burr. But luckily, those edges are spaced far enough apart that it still cleared the wax. Now, we have our hole basically drilled. I'll clean it out a little bit. But what that does is, and provided I have put it there in the right spot, is it gives us our center point that the entire rest of the ring is symmetrically finished around. Now, sometimes that has to be adjusted a little bit later, but remember, as long as the stone is bigger than the hole you created initially, you have a little wiggle room for adjusting center. All right, you don't want to overshoot it. And wow, talking about getting it right the first time, we wanted to make it a 7. It stops right at a 7. Now, normally you do want to undershoot the size by a little bit to allow for finishing. And in this case, since I know that it can actually, as I said, be as big as a 7.5, because remember, the wider you get in a ring, the tighter it'll feel. So we have our dimensions right. We're just going to clean and round up the inside a little bit to make it look a little bit more round. But again, we'll have playroom to do that later. Now that we have our ring kind of blocked out, our center point created, this is where, and you can see how much wax has to be removed. A good bit. Now, when I get a little closer, what I will do is I will outline my stone so that I know exactly the parameters I'm working around, so I can bring everything in to it symmetrically, working from the outside in. One of the other things that you do also initially is you want to judge and complete the height you want it to be. So I'm going to file the top of this down and leaving enough wax, because remember, we don't have a culet in a cabochon. There's no point we have to work with. So we can get that as low to the finger as we want. I happen to know the client likes it low to the finger. So let's remove some wax across the top to create a depth that'll end up kind of equal to my ring. After all, that's the one they liked, and I don't want to change the customer's wishes. Now, a lot of wax carvers will use files. It's just kind of the old school, and I can tell you this, much less risk of removing more than you want if you use a file. A file is slow and methodical, and I have nothing wrong to say about a file when it comes to using wax work, doing wax work. It gives you a lot more control. All right, now just watch how fast we get to something that looks somewhat similar. Now, if you do a lot of wax work, I have a specific other bench at another office that is for just wax carving. And it has the special drop drawer. It has a vacuum. It has all these tricks built into it to catch the wax particles. We're a one-stop bench here, so you just get to see it all done using one bench, which is, by the way, how most of you have to work anyway and work with. Oh my, before I had added a second bench to my shop, it was many, many years into the business, so it's not cheap. As you can see how quickly it is shaping up. Now let's cut and work on the sides. And we're going to get to a finishing point today where we basically have a solid rough draft, so to speak, where the next step will be the fine finishing, which is a whole little bit different process, and then also the spruing onto the rubber base. Now, if all that sounds foreign, well, that's what I'm here for. It won't by the end of the How Do You series on showing you something that you're going to really appreciate what gem shopping does when you hear them talk about, we will make a ring for you. I'm going to personally add a touch that I think is very effective in a ring like this. It's called a European shank. I'm going to show you what that is. That is where you square off the bottom of the ring. You've seen it many times. Now, don't think that it's too thin, because it's not by the time it gets to the thickness it needs to be. And when you square it off like that, what that does is it will literally keep it from turning. Those two little corners will be underneath the hand, and they would have to slip and come around between the knuckles for your ring to turn. Now, doesn't work for everybody. It depends on how your knuckle and how big it is, etc. But versus no other options, you might as well build it into the ring. It's one of those things you cannot add later, but has to be built in at the time the model is made. So what a neat custom choice you get when you do work with your project with gem shopping, to remember to tell them to carve, and that's what we're doing, to carve a European style shank on it. And that way you'll get, you can later still add balancing beads, but might as well start with doing it that way, because it's something you cannot do that way later. Let me just show you though, and that was minutes, how close and how far we've come along in the shaping of this piece. And now it's really starting to look like something. And now I think you can envision where and how we're going with this. And it's like, wow, right before my eyes. Now, what we'll be doing in a moment, we'll be flattening the top and getting the measurement of our stone closely laid out and burred out, so that we can then slower and more methodically finish the rest of the piece and remove the rest of the wax that we don't want around it. Now, with only a few moments of time, we have really narrowed down the parameters and the excess wax that I wasn't interested in. Here is the top view and the side view. Excuse me. You can see now getting very close to moving a little slower at this point. So let me get a little bit more symmetry and get some of the flat spots out. Remove a little bit more metal. And we're getting near the finishing point. After only a few more moments, but those moments are so critical. For every stroke you take, you're removing wax. So with a little bit of skilled additional moments and the right file, it's just like using sandpaper, basically. You get a finer and finer finish. Now, we have a little bit of detailing left to do, and there's a wax solvent that will actually put a polish on the wax. Important because the next step when we go, and we'll talk about that later, requires that there be no air bubbles on the wax. And if a shinier surface is present, it's much less likely that air sticks to it. So, short of that, this is our amazing completed wax. And you can see I've carved that flat bottom shank across there intentionally. That's called a European style shank. That greatly helps keep the ring from turning. And this is our model. So it's actually an improved version because, believe it or not, many, many years ago, I actually made this ruby ring and I didn't put that shank on it. Now it's kind of my signature shank, so to speak, because it is so effective. And boy, talk about two amazing rings. And the client, you know, there's something to be said for simplicity. The client saw my ring, liked it, and that's where the skills and everything it takes to do custom work comes into play. So, ladies, gentlemen, you know you have beautiful loose gems that you've gotten here at Gem Shopping. And if you haven't decided on what to do with them yet, as long as you've gotten them here, you can have them custom worked on. You can have a mounting made. You can have a semi-mount done. Now, I want you to not be afraid for fear of, when you hear that word, wax made, because it's a skilled process, but it's a process that will allow you to fulfill the dream of your choice in the custom mounting you have always wanted. So, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time.